David, thank you so much for talking with us. Could you tell us how you first came to do research?
So I actually started as a graduate student in 1995. I was at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and we had this general class. We actually had two. We had a pro seminar about that allowed us as the new graduate cohort to meet all the faculty, and they talked about their research. Then we also had this kind of doctoral core class where they kind of went through all the different types of research. And this was so you took a qualitative and you took a quantitative. So in the qualitative, they just kind of went through all the paradigms of research. And then in our pro seminar, that was a big class. It was kind of almost an auditorium class. It was probably anywhere, I'm remembering now, it was probably about 60, 70 folks in that bigger class, because it was all 5 departments that folks took that class in. And then in the pro seminar, it was just for us in educational policy studies. So we really got a chance to do one-on-one with each faculty member. So that kind of introduced me to qualitative work on the ground and folks who were looking at things from a number of different perspectives. So that was the way in which I came to engage qualitative research or even hearing anything about it.
What did you think about it when you first heard it?
When I first heard it, the thing I always thought about was, wow, this is really stoic in terms of what it is that they're doing. But then people started to, as we started to talk about it more, people started to really dig in and talk about folks who were challenging it. So there was a book by a guy named Andrew Gitlin. He edited a piece called Power and Method. So when I was reading it, it's like, oh, okay, here's some folks who are kind of complicating it, making it a little different, talking about responsibility, accountability to communities. So that was big for me to see. And as I was ending my tenure as a graduate student, decolonizing methodologies came out. Mm-hmm. So those were kind of the bookends to say, here's some ways to do this differently. So that was really influential to my own take, because it was an example for me that the traditional statement of the purpose, literature review, methods, cite, or what have you, it complicated a bit. And then another woman who was on faculty, Wanda Pillow, she had the other qualitative class, and she got us abreast to the language of qualitative research. And then she said, well, remember, that's just the mainstream language. You can upset this. So this was, I remember in her class, I wrote a paper that I think I titled it, I Am Not a Researcher, in terms of just kind of saying, like, I'm just not conscribing to these traditional methods that really I saw really not connecting to anything. But those 3 classes were really influential in terms of providing examples of ways to interrupt the practice. But again, understanding what that interruption was, what the mainstream world is expecting, and then you figuring out what it is that you're trying to do. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. How did you deal with that really difficult triumvirate in your own dissertation research?
For me, and it's always, so in my own dissertation, I was doing a sociological analysis of a policy that was enforced in the state of California. So Proposition 209 ends effectively affirmative action in the state. And there was in that space, I had to think about, okay, in terms of policy, where do we get at the origins? What is its history? And then what is the expected implementation? Because then it hadn't been rolled out yet. Mm-hmm. So now in this rolling out of policy, where would it take folks? And more importantly, what was the rationale behind it? So for me, I was looking at, well, one, I know I have to do some archival work. Second, I have to do some policy work and look at the ways in which laws are shaped. Because in my research, what I found was there were only 2 words that were different between the Civil Rights Clause in the California Constitution and Proposition 209, right? And those two words changed the entire policy, right? So it was a whole new exercise in discourse analysis, right? And then using critical race theory as the frame and saying, well, if we understand racism as endemic, and we understand that higher education is understood as a property of whiteness, then now what is the rationale? How's this playing itself out? So there was this interpretive space that I had to figure out. So what universe of folks were talking about this interpretive stance? Then what strand of folks were talking about an archival historical strand? Then who was talking about sociology in relationship to policy implementation? So now pairing all three of those spaces for the literature, and then for method, so really kind of arguing what is a critical race method, right? So now really kind of pushing that. So if I'm centering race and the intersections of race, class, and gender in this policy, who is the affected, right? So asking this larger question. For future work, it really allowed me to kind of ask these questions around origin, around implementation, and around formation, right? And actually in the order of origin, formation, implementation, right? So kind of looking at it in that way and kind of guiding what I do now in terms of who is rationalizing what to what end.